As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So the House finally elected a speaker on Wednesday, and they elected a guy named Mike Johnson. He's a Republican from Louisiana, and his first order of business was putting a resolution on the floor to express strong support for Israel, and this was the first bill that he put forward in his role as speaker. So this resolution passed in a vote of 412 to 10, and it says that the U.S. stands with Israel in the wake of the October 7th Hamas attack, and as Israel is relentlessly bombing Gaza. The resolution reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to providing military aid to Israel and said Congress will work to pass more. So the bill says that the House, quote, stands ready to assist Israel with emergency resupply and other security, diplomatic, and intelligence support, end quote. It also called for the U.S. to continue enforcing sanctions on Iran and condemned the Hamas attack. So 9 Democrats voted against the resolution, including Jamal Bowman, Andre Carson, Cori Bush, Al Green, Summer Lee, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Delia Ramirez, and Rashida Tlaib. And one Republican did vote against it, and that was Representative Thomas Massie. So explaining his opposition to the bill, Massie pointed to the sanctions aspect. He's opposed to sanctions as a policy, and also the promises of military support and aid. Massie said, quote, it contains an open-ended promise of military support that is so broad that it could be interpreted to commit U.S. soldiers to the conflict. U.S. troops should not be engaged in this conflict, end quote. So Johnson won the speakership hours before the vote and pledged that his first action would be in support of Israel. He said, and now he said this right after winning the gavel to be Speaker of the House, Johnson said, quote, our nation's greatest ally in the Middle East is under attack. The first bill that I'm going to bring to this floor in just a little while will be in support of our dear friend Israel, end quote. So that's his priority, is Israel. So Israel has agreed to a request from the U.S. to delay its ground invasion of Gaza so the U.S. can send more missile defense systems to the region to prepare for an expected escalation of attacks on U.S. troops. And again, this was reported by the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday, and there were similar reports earlier in the week. This one was a little more specific. It says that the U.S. is rushing to deploy nearly a dozen air defense systems to the region that will aim to protect U.S. troops stationed in Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. So Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said on Saturday that he ordered the deployment of a terminal high-altitude area defense battery, that's a THAAD missile system, and also multiple Patriot air defense systems to the region. This Wall Street Journal report said that Israel has agreed to hold off its invasion until the additional air defenses are put in place, which could be completed at the end of the week. So later on Wednesday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that a ground invasion was coming, but he did not say when. Netanyahu said, quote, we are preparing for a ground invasion. I will not elaborate on when, how, or how many. I will also not elaborate on the various calculations we are making, which the public is mostly unaware of, and that is how things should be, end quote. So very vague. So this is an investigation from the New York Times, and it is titled A Close Look at Some Key Evidence in the Gaza Hospital Blast. And what's interesting about this is that this is the bombing of the Ali Arab Hospital in Gaza City that happened on October 17th. The bombing actually hit the parking lot outside of the hospital where there was thousands of people sheltering in courtyards and things, because this is in Gaza City where people were told to evacuate. So a lot of people went to the hospital to take shelter. So anyway, you know how it went when this story first broke. It was Israel bombs hospital, 500 dead. And it was believable considering what Israel has been doing in Gaza. Israel came out and denied it. They said it was a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket that actually hit the hospital parking lot. And they put out this video from an Al Jazeera live feed that shows what looks like a rocket is flying through the air, and then it breaks up midair, and then there's a blast on the ground, and then there's another big one at the hospital. So according to this New York Times investigation, and the U.S. has also pointed to this video as evidence, according to this investigation, that rocket was actually more likely fired from Israel, not from Gaza. And they also said that rocket was probably not the cause of the hospital blast because it was about 2 miles away. They looked at all the angles. The video that Israel put out was just one angle, and they looked at different feeds and they lined it up. So they're not saying that Israel did the bombing, but what they're saying is that Israel and the U.S.'s key piece of evidence is not evidence. It just has nothing to do with the blast on the ground. So it's pretty interesting to see that come from the New York Times. And they're still saying that, again, that they're not saying that this proves who was responsible, but they're saying, right now, they don't know. They're saying it's impossible to know. who bombed that hospital. So Russia is set to revoke its ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. That's the CTBT. And this treaty prohibits all nuclear weapons tests and explosions. And the U.S. has never ratified it. So this is putting Russia in the same line as the U.S. when it comes to this treaty. So Russia's upper house of parliament, the Federation Council, approved the bill on Wednesday to revoke the ratification. The lower house, which is the State Duma, they approved the bill last week, and now it heads to Putin's desk for his signature. So Russia ratified this treaty in 2000, and Putin has said that revoking it would mirror U.S. policy. So the U.S. and Russia are still participants in the 1963 Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and that prohibits all nuclear weapons tests except those performed underground. So also on Wednesday, Russia conducted a simulation of a nuclear strike, but this wasn't any kind of live fire thing. It was just a simulation. And it's unclear at this point if Russia plans to resume live fire nuclear tests. So actually last week, the U.S. conducted an explosion at a nuclear test site in Nevada. And according to Bloomberg, the test used chemicals and radioisotopes to validate new predictive explosion models that can help the Energy Department detect atomic blasts in other countries. So if they use radioisotopes, it sounds like it was a nuclear explosion. And Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said that Moscow perceived the test as a political message. It came just a few hours after Russia said it was going to revoke its ratification of this treaty. So Ryabkov said, quote, "It is definitely a political message. We remain vigilant. As our president said, if the United States makes a move toward full-scale nuclear tests, we will have to give a reciprocal response in that field too," end quote.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
You have an article that's coming out tomorrow, really goes into this in detail. Biden, war in the Constitution. Excuse me. All power in the federal government comes from the Constitution and from no other source. Congress, however, has managed to extend its reach beyond the confines of the Constitution domestically by spending money in areas that it cannot regulate, and in foreign policy by looking the other way when presidents initiate military violence, you write.
So we'll take Ukraine as an example. Congress gave Joe Biden a blank check for $113 billion. Spend it however you want. It's being spent about 25% in cash, going to the most corrupt regime in the world that we know of, and the rest in military hardware. Some of the military hardware can only be operated by Americans. So a good picture right there. So are there American soldiers on the ground? Yes. Are they pulling the trigger that is sending projectiles to kill Russian boys? Yes. Has this been authorized by Congress? It has not. In the case of Israel, because the House of Representatives is dysfunctional, quite frankly, Gerald, I am happy it's dysfunctional. It can't enact any more laws. It can't regulate any more behavior. It can't right any more wrongs in its own mind, and it can't tax any more events. Let it stay dysfunctional for a long time. But there's been no authorization whatsoever for Israel, and still we have special forces on the ground in Gaza. Colonel McGregor says 2 of them have been killed, and we don't know about it. He knows it from his sources. Israel and the U.S. are keeping it from mainstream media. And what are those 2,000 Marines getting ready to do? Storm the beaches without congressional authorization? Did Congress declare war on Gaza and somehow we missed it?
Presidents don't care about the Constitution, and they make up these laws that give the president the right to do anything that he wants.
Correct. They made up the War Powers Resolution, which allows any president to fight any war against any foe at any time for 90 days without a declaration of war, in defiance of treaties, without congressional approval. Then he has to go to Congress after the 90 days. If he doesn't get it, he's got another 90 days to wind down whatever he started. If he refuses to wind it down, then it takes 2/3 vote of Congress to bring it back. This is patently unconstitutional. Nixon vetoed this because he thought it crimped his style. Nixon thought that just because the president does it, that means it's lawful, and the president could kill anybody he wanted. It's unlawful because it is a delegating from Congress to the president the power to choose a target for war. Madison was very clear. If the president can both choose a target for war and wage the war, he's not a president, he's a prince. We have that power separated. But Congress looks the other way when presidents kill people, particularly if they're unpopular people like the Palestinians.
Well, let's look at all the presidents in our lifetime that have killed people.
You could not name a president from FDR to the present who has not killed people without a declaration of war. FDR, for all his faults, he did have a declaration of war, but start with Truman and go all the way up to Biden. They have all killed without declarations of war. Absolutely.
Well, how about I don't think JFK did he?
Good point. You're right.
And they killed him for not doing it.
Correct. They killed him for wanting to dismantle the CIA, the president's secret army.
And not go into Vietnam.
Right. Right. Well, we were in Vietnam. I suppose we killed people there under JFK. He thought he was sending advisors in and never imagined it would morph into 500,000 troops, 10% of whom would come home in body bags.
Yep.
52,000 American boys of your generation and mine
Yep.
Killed in a useless, meaningless, immoral, illegal, unconstitutional war that was intended to let LBJ have 12 years in the White House.
And about 250,000 to 350,000 seriously wounded.
Yeah.
And mentally, I know guys that were there, they don't want to even talk about it. They're so upset about it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we had the Nobel Peace of Crap Prize winner, Barack Obama. Assad has to go. Gaddafi has to go, and lies his way into power by becoming president as a peace candidate. And he launches the Afghan troop surge. And then we had Bill Clinton. Every time he got caught with his pants down, it's bombs away over Baghdad. And then we have Biden, who in his stupid talk the other day or last week talked about the Israeli war. He quotes Madeleine Albright.
The killer, if ever there was one.
Who's quoted, and anybody could Google it up, but Madeleine Albright, Leslie Stahl's 60 Minutes, when Leslie Stahl asks her if the price of 500,000 Iraqi children under the age of 5 that have died because of what Bill Clinton did to Iraq, is it worth the price? And she said, yes, it is. And that's who Biden quotes.
Yeah. And then, of course, there is the worst of all of them, George W. Bush in Iraq and Afghanistan, lying his way into mass murder and war crimes.
Yep. And you write here, Judge, and this is very important. Beyond the imminent attack, the basis for war must be real. The adversary's anti-U.S. military behavior must be grave. The objective of war must be clear and attainable, and the means must be proportionate to the threat. Has Russian military threatened U.S.? No. Have the Palestinian people? No. What grave acts of aggression have either committed or threatened against the U.S.? You write none. Yet we're at war with both of these.
Correct. Now, what I stated there is not my opinion. That's international law to which the U.S. theoretically is bound by the Geneva Conventions, the UN Charter, 3 or 4 other treaties that we've signed. But, just like the Constitution, just like federal laws, presidents do whatever they want. I don't know what the consequences will be. McGregor and Ritter are telling me potentially disastrous and likely World War III. If those
World War III's begun.
If those 2,000 Marines on that ship storm the beaches in Gaza, do you think that Turkey and Lebanon and Iran will sit still? Of course not.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
All right, so now we've reached the time when the debaters will have an opportunity to question each other. So, Alan, we'll start with you. Do you have a question you'd like to ask Jeremy?
Yes, well, Jeremy is in favor of a one-state solution. In other words, to basically the destruction of the state of Israel. Given what we saw 2 weeks ago, Jeremy, what do you think would happen to more than 7 million Israeli Jews that live in Israel in a one-state solution?
What would happen to them?
Yes, what would happen to them? For example, if Hamas is in control of the entire state, what would happen to them?
I don't foresee Hamas being in control of the state. I don't think that would be possible or politically feasible.
Really? Why not? They control the Gaza Strip. Why not?
Yeah, well, there's a reason they control the Gaza Strip, as I've already explained, which was because Israel and the U.S. opposed their move toward a unity government with a Palestinian Authority, opposed their move toward moderation, and tried to drive a wedge between Hamas and Fatah. So it's Israel's own policies that have really created this monster in Gaza. And so, I don't foresee if there were, it's hard to look at a hypothetical like, well, what if suddenly we have a single state? Well, what would that look like? I guess the state that you're imagining isn't the same state that I'm imagining. And also you say that I'm advocating the destruction of Israel. Well, not the physical destruction of Israel by any means. Certainly it would mean if there was a return of refugees, if the right of the refugees was respected and they were allowed to return, it would mean the end of Israel as a Jewish state, which I can understand your opposition to that. But I personally find the idea of a state defined by ethnicity or race to be quite abhorrent.
Can I answer to that, Tom?
Yeah, please.
Well, at least you recognize that there is a monster in the Gaza Strip. So congratulations for that. Now, of course, you're saying that you would prefer this one-state solution to look like a free country. There are no words to define it. It is obvious that if the state of Israel disappears, the Jews are going to get murdered, and that's going to be genocide. I mean, this is not hypothetical. We saw it 2 weeks ago. What do you think would happen? They would swim in chocolate rivers and drink tea with cookies with Hamas and the like? Of course not. Come on, give me a break. Now, apart from that, you say that it would be a sort of a place where equality before the law. I mean, I talked about the 20% of Israeli citizens who are Arabs. They have exactly the same rights as the Jews. Even more, they don't have to be forced to serve in the IDF. Jews are. So, I mean, it exists in Israel right now. Now, if you're going to say, well, Israel doesn't withdraw basically its security operations, for example, in Judea and Samaria. Well, in Gaza, they have full control, basically Hamas. But in Judea and Samaria, there are 3 areas, as you know. And what do you want Israel to do? To, apart from Gaza, to have another Hamas or theocratic dictatorship in Judea and Samaria right next to every other Jewish town in Israel? Basically, what you are advocating is for the Jews to commit suicide. So
just let me interject here. After Jeremy's response to this, then I'll give Jeremy an opportunity to ask you a question. And then if you both would like to repeat this process, I'll give you, Alan, another chance for another question. So Jeremy, do you want to respond?
Yeah, sure. So again, just talking about this hypothetical one state, he's saying what would happen is if that could exist, is that the Palestinians would just murder all the Jews. Well, I think that overlooks that in order for that to ever possibly happen, hypothetically speaking, that would resolve the legitimate grievances of the Palestinians. And so again, he's just looking at it from the point of view of his analysis that the root cause of the conflict is just inherent Arab hatred of Jews. I've already addressed that. That's not the case. They have legitimate grievances. Alan's just refusing to acknowledge them. And so that's my response to that.
Alan, would you like to? You can take 3 to 5 minutes if you like to sum up the argument, or one final response to Jeremy, whatever you like to do at the time.
It's important to get back to the main issue here, which is basically that Israel is justified in doing whatever it takes to completely destroy Hamas. Now, as it is clear from its own charter, Hamas' goal is genocide. Its political system is a medieval theocracy that intends to kill every freedom and bring death and destruction on anyone who does not support its totalitarian agenda. It is funded by Iran, which seeks to impose a global dictatorship under Islamic law. Israel is the exact opposite of these maniacs. It is an open society that loves life and defends human dignity. In a fight between civilization and barbarism, any decent human being, especially libertarians and classical liberals, whose entire philosophy is based on life and liberty, should side with Israel. And this implies supporting Israel in its duty to destroy Hamas. I would like to say that there was this old von Mises lecture. I don't remember if it's an essay or a lecture itself. It's called basically middle of the road policies lead to socialism. Something like that. Well, here in this context, middle of the road positions lead to Hamas because Hamas is looking for genocide. That's what they're looking for. And just one more thing. Jeremy mentioned before that the war in 1948 was because of Israel, and that's why the resolution 181 never came to be. Well, it never came to be, Jeremy, because you had several Arab armies that went to make war, to build war, wage war against Israel, and to kill the Jews. Basically, that was their stated goal, not to create any Arab state or any Palestinian Arab state. So basically, that's all I can say about that. And I hope people have more clear idea of why Israel is entitled to do whatever it takes to destroy Hamas. Thank you, Tom.
All right, Jeremy, final word from you.
Sure. Just to clarify one point there, the reason Resolution 181, General Assembly Resolution 181 was not ever implemented is not because the Arab states launched an attack on the Jewish community in Palestine. It was because the General Assembly had no authority to implement or petition Palestine. It forwarded that recommendation under the Security Council, where it died because the Security Council recognized that it could not, it had no authority to partition Palestine against the will of most of its inhabitants. So just to clarify that. Coming to the resolution, just to summarize my point, I think it's important that we recognize Palestinians' legitimate grievances historically and right up to the present. And only by looking at their legitimate grievances and acknowledging them can we possibly get our analysis correct. And I think it's unfortunate that so many people criticize and condemn, rightfully so, the crimes of one side or the other. They unfortunately tend to then defend the crimes of the side that they favor. And what I'm saying is that we should be critical and condemn the crimes committed by both sides. But the case is that we are dealing with a situation where you have an occupier and an occupied people. And the crimes committed by Israel against Palestinians have occurred on incomparably greater scale, starting with the ethnic cleansing of Palestine by which the Jewish state of Israel came into existence.
Thank you so much for being here. And you may be aware that 22 years ago tomorrow, that's October 26th, 2001, what should be absolutely hated and despised Patriot Act was signed into. And as John Whitehead put in a recent article, he said, "We're still grappling with the blowback that arises from allowing one's freedoms to be eviscerated in exchange for the phantom promise of security." We are living 22 years of Patriot Act blowback, and I want to get right to this here from a great article by Judge Andrew Napolitano, and he points out that there's a long tradition of this kind of thing throughout history, from George III and his Stamp Act of 1765, which resulted in British agents searching colonial homes without individualized suspicion, to George W. Bush and his Patriot Act of 2001, which enabled one federal agent to authorize another to search without any warrants in defiance of the Constitution. Tyrants have consistently claimed safety as the excuse and purported benefit of trampling liberty. And the people living in fear, of course, and this is my side, this is not Judge Knapp, the people living in fear will gladly look to the government, well, that often is the one that's oppressing them, and I'm understating this by quite a bit, to somehow protect them. The people with all the power are not the ones that you really should be going to. Anyways, Judge Knapp continues. In both 1765 and 2001, the liberty sacrificed was the right to privacy, the right to be left alone. Now, there was resistance in a much different way in 1765 than there was in 2001 and the years to follow. But we'll get into this a little bit more in just a moment. Now, back to John Whitehead and his great article, 22 Years of Blowback from the USA Patriot Act, which I taxed the title for this episode from this article. And Whitehead puts it this way: rushed through Congress a mere 45 days after the 9/11 attacks. And if you think about this, and I don't want to get too tinfoil hatty here, but this is a massive piece of legislation that references, when you read through it, a lot of it is just referencing other stuff that's on the books. To knock that out in 45 days, to knock it out and get it passed and signed into law in 45 days, that means someone had to have had some ideas of how this needed to be done, this to legalize more violations of the Constitution. I mean, they're illegal because the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, but to put in statute that more violations of the Constitution were legal, it's like they had it ready to roll just in case something crazy went down. What a surprise. But anyways, rushed through in a mere 45 days after the 9/11 attacks, the USA Patriot Act drove a stake through the heart of the Bill of Rights, undermined civil liberties, expanded the government's powers, and opened the door to far-reaching surveillance by the government on American citizens. And of course, it didn't end at the Patriot Act. A lot of people think that the Patriot Act is just Section 215, the Call Detail Records Program, which I believe expired in 2020. But they do the same thing under other authorities, and a majority of the Patriot Act is actually permanent. And some of the things that were set to sunset were, well, extended or made permanent. Now, when thinking about the Patriot Act, which obviously should never have existed in the first place, but was passed and supported in a time of extreme fear, it's hard not to think of Benjamin Franklin's great quote from 1755. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And also, John Adams, back when he was one of the good guys, pointed out that fear is the foundation of most governments. Of course, I would just remove the word most on that one, but the sentiment is absolutely true, and we are living in that reality today. Just hear from John Whitehead. Again, another article, Who Will Protect Us from an Unpatriotic Patriot Act? And he points out that the Patriot Act also redefined terrorism. And I think this is a huge part of it that a lot of people miss because we focus so much of our time and energy just on the surveillance authorities, but they also redefined terrorism so broadly that many non-terrorist political activities, such as protest marches, demonstrations, and civil disobedience. Remember, James Madison told us that the people should use a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union in Federalist 46, arguing that the structure of the Constitution made that an essential tool to keep the federal government within the bounds of the Constitution, or even just stop bad policy that is within the bounds of the Constitution. So, I mean, they want to call it civil disobedience, but it's the government that's disobeying, and it's the people that are refusing to go along with it in that scenario. But of course, the Patriot Act gives us such a broad view of terrorism that we've heard in recent years that all kinds of weird stuff, someone might get brought up on terrorism charges. They aren't always, but I think we're always being probed for more and more and more. Demonstrations and civil disobedience are now considered potential terrorist acts, John writes, thereby rendering anyone desiring to engage in protected First Amendment expressive activities as suspects of the surveillance state. He goes on. Federal agents and police officers, also on the local level, are now authorized to conduct covert black bag sneak and peek searches, which I mentioned from Epic earlier, of homes and offices while you are away and confiscate your personal property without first notifying you of their intent or their presence. They don't care about the Constitution, Bill of Rights, nothing to these people, as long as the people go along with it, of course. He said, early on, U.S. officials solved the problem of how to implement their authoritarian policies without incurring a citizen uprising. Fear. The powers that be want us to feel threatened by forces beyond our control. Terrorists, shooters, bombers. Fear is the foundation of most governments. Fear is the foundation of government power. Now, John Adams went on to say that was in 1775, back when he was one of the good guys, before the Alien and Sedition Acts by a couple of decades. He went on to say, the American people are strong. They're never going to fall for this garbage. Well, maybe at the time they weren't going to, but by 1798, they certainly did with the Alien and Sedition Acts, and he was the guy signing it. So this is a lesson for all of us. Don't trust people with power, even the people that might sound awesome about the nature of power, because once they're there, they can do a lot of bad stuff. Anyways, back to John Whitehead. They want us to be afraid and dependent on government and its militarized armies for our safety and well-being. Most of all, they want us distrustful of each other, divided by our prejudices, and at each other's throats. Wait, once you trade your freedom for security, the terrorists win. Once you trade your freedom for security, the terrorists win. And that's, I think, kind of what Benjamin Franklin's quote really gets to the heart of. That if you give up liberty for so-called security, you really deserve neither, because you're making a terrible, terrible choice. And I know there's some interesting context about that. But Thomas Paine, I think, sums it up best. The strength and powers of despotism consist wholly in the fear of resisting it.
Where the contest is between Biden and Trump, it's a heavy burden to try to say, this guy is really the good guy and he's right on everything.
Yeah, it's impossible.
So we'd rather have Thomas Massey in that argument.
That would be a good idea. Well, let's look at a couple more reactions. Put this next one on. Now, I don't know this person who tweeted it. It's just interesting. I think it's a journalist, a conservative journalist. Breaking: Mike Johnson has officially been elected speaker. Mike has pledged to release the January 6th footage promptly, kill the omnibus spending bills, and is hated by leftist Rep. Adam Schiff. And then he goes on by saying, thank you, Representative Matt Gaetz, for making this happen. And I think that's also interesting because I think Matt Gaetz's capital has risen significantly. Now, he was really kind of the donkey for a while because you got rid of McCarthy without a plan, and I think Massey made that point, and it was a legitimate point. But I think now he has recovered, bringing in Johnson, who Massey has supported as well.
But we look at this and we should, especially under the circumstances of getting a new speaker, and we don't want it too hard. But I can't help but thinking, what was the first thing? They had a bill already, then they passed it overwhelmingly, and they didn't even read it. They didn't have it printed out. So that's still that problem is still existing.
Well, let's go to what you were talking about, Dr. Paul, because there was some business on the House floor yesterday. Let's go to this next one. This is from Johnson's initial speech as the Speaker of the House. He says, we've got to bring relief to the American people by reining in federal spending and bringing down inflation, which sounds good until you look at the next quote. If you want to put the next one up, then he says, so gives relief to the American people. Then he says, the first bill I'm going to bring to the floor will be in support of our dear friend Israel. So the very first thing he does, before anything else, to give any relief to Americans for spending and anything else, is to put out a bill on Israel that, as you point out, no one had a chance to read, really. We weren't able to see it until this morning.
Yeah, and, in the bill that Biden has proposed, there's $14 billion already. And with this resolution and the consensus, there will be more money. I mean, even without any of this activity. But the law of the land is laid out there, so the money will be spent. And that's why my pessimism creeps in, and I think justifiably, are they really going to cut anything? And that is the big problem. And they never want to accept the fact that, we should take this opportunity. There's too many people that want money, and we're supplying money to both sides. We've sent money to the Palestinians and to Israel. Well, if we're running out of money, we have to cut this, or no, we have to cut this because these are the bad people and these are the good people. And what's the matter with not going along with the Constitution? Where is the authority to have foreign aid?
Yeah, at all.
Cut them both. But that's not quite there. But that's where it has to happen, though, eventually, because we are bankrupt, and the bankruptcy will probably come where they won't quit printing, but the elimination of the debt will occur through the inflation.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said when we were up in D.C. To the audience. We haven't had a speaker for a couple weeks, and nobody's even noticed. So it's only the Washington class that says that. But so on this Israel bill, I bet Thomas Massey wishes that he had you back and Walter and Jimmy Duncan back up there, Virgil Goode and a few others to be around him, because he was the only no vote on this bill on the Republican side, which can be very dangerous. There's a lot of strong support for Israel in Congress, not so much among the American people as we talked about earlier this week, but nevertheless it really puts a target on his back. But wisely, he came out with a good statement on this. If you can put on this next clip, this is a tweet that Massey put out when he voted no. And I'm going to read some of it, a good deal of it, because it's good. He starts out by saying, I condemn the barbaric attack on Israel, and I affirm Israel's right to defend itself. However, I will not be voting for the resolution because, and this is true, this is the last three resolve clauses, by the way, and he talks about, 1, it calls for sanctions on a sovereign country. Sanctions are a prelude to war and hurt the citizens of the country more than the government of the country that's being sanctioned. Ultimately, sanctions create laws that will be used to prosecute American citizens who engage in trade, not citizens of the sanctioned entity. In short, sanctions do not achieve their stated purpose, but breed resentment of our country abroad. Great point. Number 2, he says, it asserts the necessity of foreign aid commitments, which I have voted against. Our country is going bankrupt, and we can't afford to borrow money to send overseas. Yet this resolution states that we should. And go to the next one, if you'll just bear with me, Dr. Paul, because it's worth reading what he says. Number 3, it contains an open-ended promise of military support that is so broad that it could be interpreted to commit U.S. soldiers to the conflict. U.S. troops should not be engaged in this conflict. And 4, it tends to broaden the conflict to other countries when it would be better to keep the war contained geographically. So I think we're about ready to close out. We need to get some sleep. We were flying around and our wings are tired. And so I want to thank all of our viewers. Thank you for being patient while we slipped in a couple of best of programs over the week while we weren't here in town. We're glad that you're back with us and watching the show. Please hit like and please comment. And please send the show around to your friends. Help us get more subscribers and more viewers. We appreciate you very much. Over to you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And I want to thank our viewers for tuning in today. And we're glad to be back here on our usual seats here and doing our little program. And as I mentioned earlier, I got more interested in going there when Daniel explained to me, this is the Committee for the Republic. They want to, preserve the Republic. And that is a big issue because the holy word that you use by politicians incessantly is we're going to go to war to the world. We have an empire. We're going to spend whatever it is to spread democracy. And if you really look at true democracy, it's one thing that the founders despised, and they tried to write the Constitution to try to, prevent the dictatorship of the majority. It befuddles me why people who come from the left are so adamant on pure democracy and will never look to the republic. And I said to them, well, under a democracy, all you have to do is get 51%. You can do anything you want to the minority. And right now, the people who want special benefits, they're in the majority. And those of us who are in the minority and we believe in liberty and the Constitution, it's a rough job. So we have to convert people once again to pay attention to our traditions and what it would be like if we did have a true republic and that we were voting to protect liberty. Then I believe that we would be on the road to peace and prosperity, and that is our goal.